brilliant, insightful, and humorous book. It's mind-expanding. It covers a vast array of topics that are really important to us right now, and I highly recommend it to everybody to read. So now the subtitle is Our Positive Future and a Way to Get There from Here. We can start there or anywhere that you'd like to begin.
Well, Lance, this is an exciting story because we're in the midst of actually experiencing an evolutionary opportunity. I was going to say evolutionary leap, but I have to say it's an opportunity because we really don't know which way it's going to go. We're playing this one right down to the wire, and it's a very exciting time. So, and you can feel it in your gut, and everyone can, because it's actually, there's a biological thing called the biological imperative. And biologists don't know exactly, where it is physically or how it works or anything, but we know it exists. And what it basically says is that organisms, when threatened, will automatically do something to stay alive. So even a bacterium, if you try to change the environment to kill a bacterium, it'll do everything to try and stay alive. So there's this built-in thing to stay alive. And when there's a threat, it engages us unconsciously at first, like something's going on. And so it's very interesting because, sure enough, this biological imperative is spreading globally right now, that people know that things are in a state of flux. And it's a very exciting time because it's going to offer us an opportunity to change our path. And there's a profound significance as to why. And it's like so fundamental. It's like, oh, okay. And the reason why is science has recognized that we are precipitating into the sixth mass extinction of life on this planet. Five times on this planet, life essentially got wiped out and then started all over again. And they're just massive die-offs, and they're called mass extinctions. And the previous 5 were due to things such as comets or asteroids hitting the Earth and upsetting the ecosystem and blowing it all out and causing a mass extinction. And then new life comes from that, starts all over again. It's happened 5 times before. Right now we're into the 6th mass extinction, and I really want to emphasize emphasize this point. It's not a suggestion; it's a scientific reality that this is going on. And when you say mass extinction, that means us too. So basically, it says that the ecosystem is turning upside down and won't support life the way it has been supported because it's just in a state of chaos and upheaval. Well, what's interesting, and scientists have recognized, number one, is that this mass extinction is actually due to human behavior. So it says, oh my God, the way we have been treating each other and the way we've been treating Mother Nature has disrupted this stuff, And
we're so out of balance.
So, man, I mean, pillaging the garden is back to basically what it's all about. Everybody's ripped everything out of the garden, and there's nothing left.
Right.
And yet, you say, well, okay, if we stay in the same path that we're going, this is the path that is causing the extinction, the way we are living. So it basically says, we're coming to a crossroads. We have to make a decision on how we're going to go into the future, because if we keep it the way it is, then the future's already written. It's like, we're going extinct. And this extinction isn't like way down the road. It's like even like within 35 years, it has been recognized that within 35 years, the fish that we use for food will be fished out of the ocean. An ocean without fish food. I mean, it's like almost like unthinkable, and yet, it's a total reality. It's, you can measure it right now. So,
absolutely.
So it's a very interesting time because it's this movement in and being pushed into this other thing. It's also being orchestrated through the planets and the alignment. The 2012 story is all part of this. And there's a real interesting way of looking at it, because what we're seeing and focusing on is a building up of chaos. And if you focus on that, that gets really scary because it's like, oh, you had this great structure and order, now it's all disappearing out there. And we would live in fear, and that's the way media is like presenting like all these crises, and everybody's like living in fear. And yet, there's a real interesting reason for this. So it's not an accident. It's a reason for this. And basically, Albert Einstein had a wonderful quote about it. He wrote, you can't solve the problems with the same thinking used in creating the problems. And basically, it just said, well, then the thinking has to change. Well, the thinking is what? The way we live. The institutions that support the way we live, because they were built to encourage a lifestyle that is now causing the problem. So why is it important? It's like we can't get to the better level until the institutions that are driving us toward extinction have to collapse.
Exactly.
And we build something better. And it's the story of the caterpillar and the butterfly. Yeah, the cells, the billions of cells inside a caterpillar, when it's growing, it's like a world inside where each cell is like a miniature human, and there's billions of these cells working together, creating this harmony, and the environment of the caterpillar is growing, and everybody's all excited. I mean, it's just like economic go, go, go. And then one day the butterfly starts to stop eating, and the food stops coming in, and all the cells that had jobs, like the cells in the digestive system, are looking around going, well, there's no work going on here. With all the plants are closing down, and all of a sudden this structure that was a highly organized civilization of billions of these cells, it starts to fall apart. And if you looked at it and you were in it, it would horrify you in a sense. And many of the cells actually commit a biological suicide. It's called apoptosis. It's sort of like a chemical push the button and boom, it's a Kevorkian thing. They're gone. And the thing is, so here's in the middle of this caterpillar, there's all this chaos going on, and yet here's the beautiful part, because it relates to everyone that's listening online right now, that among the population, there are cells that are genetically identical in that caterpillar, but they see the world differently than the conventional caterpillar cells. And that these cells are called imaginal cells. And the imaginal cells have a design that's far better than the design of the caterpillar. And the imaginal cells coordinate all the other cells and take the structure that was a caterpillar and turn it into the more magnificent butterfly. Well, this is, we're in caterpillar Earth right now, on the threshold of the opportunity to do the butterfly.
Wow. Amazing. And I heard that they turn into a literal goo inside the butterfly's cocoon. And if what you're saying is true, and of course it is, then and it only takes a certain amount of the cells to create this new form of life, then it may not take all of humanity to be aligned in one spontaneous moment, although it may. It take a small percentage.
Oh, that's the beautiful part, and we've already been recognizing that the people that have done this transcendental meditation research. Okay, and what have they shown? That they can get the square root of 1% of a population, which is a relatively small number, any level that you're working at, and you get the square root of 1% of that population, and get them to get into a mantra meditation state of peace. And what they've shown is that with that small number, getting in harmony and coherently having these thoughts of peace, that they actually affected the statistics of war and violence and crime whenever they did the experiment. So basically it says it didn't take a large number of people, but it basically takes that number, square root of 1%, and when they start thinking coherently of a new vision, all the other cells will then start to assemble in that same vision.
Now, the scientists throw numbers out like 90 to 97% of our DNA is somehow not coherent. Could this be a storehouse of unused potential that is waiting for that square root of 1% to reassemble or reawaken and align with?
Yeah, well, it's a very exciting piece of that question of how did we make a human with the same number of genes that are essentially present in the smallest worms on the planet.
Right.
The question, how can you make it? Well, here's what that stuff is. Very simply, it looks like this. The genes are the blueprints to make the parts. So imagine like a store like Home Depot or something like that. You go in and you got all these different parts. And so the genes are the equivalent of making all the parts. The other information, the so-called junk DNA, which turns out to be the most important part, is the equivalent of the blueprints of how you're going to use those genes and what you're going to build out of it. So I can use the same genes and create this little worm. And ultimately, with not many more genes, I can use the same building blocks and create a human. And so the whole thing is, so we're all using and sharing about the same kinds of genes, essentially, and yet the opportunity is that each of us can take the building plans and create from the building blocks all the different kinds of forms of life.
Wow. I found it quite astonishing to read on your website and also elsewhere, and in the book, that there are other forms of life, even a grain of rice, which are far more complicated and complex than a human being. What differentiates, what creates that difference? I mean, is that tangible, or is that something that unseen that we haven't yet been able to quantify?
Well, this is the new biology that's unfolding right now. Because if we ask the question from the current understanding of biology by the general public, the general public perceives of genes as these blueprints that control your fate and your characteristics, and that genes turn on and genes turn off. And in that belief system, it really is, genes are like self-actualizing. Genes make decisions, like a cancer gene turns on or something like that. So we see the genes as being in charge. But what has happened since about the 1990 on, a new understanding of genetics has come in that is so profoundly different. It changes the way life will be on this planet when we understand the meaning of it. And so the old vision was called genetic control by genes. Genes turn on, genes turn off. The new understanding realizes, genes are actually blueprints like we thought, but then the issue is, do blueprints turn on or off? And I bring that up, like, for example, go into an architect's office, and she's working on a blueprint, and you lean over her shoulder and you ask her, is that blueprint on or off? And of course, you get looked at like, what are you talking about? It's a blueprint. There's no on and off. And it's like, this all of a sudden changes the world, because, like, genes don't control anything. Genes are blueprints. They're just like blueprints from a house. Blueprints, if we believe the genes work the way they did, it would be like taking a set of blueprints and driving by a building site, and throwing the blueprints into the yard, drive down the road, and come back in a few weeks, and there's this house right there. It's like the genes created it. It's like, no, they're blueprints. and so the new science says, well, then how do you build and control all this? Well, it's a new science called epigenetic control, not genetic control, epigenetic control. It's just coming out into the public right now because it's so profound in its meaning. So what does it mean? Well, epi, the prefix, means above. And so if I say genetic control, that's control by genes. If I say epigenetic control, that says control above the genes. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It says the genes are like blueprints, and the mind is like a contractor that reads the blueprints. And so as you perceive your world, your mind will adjust the genetics of your biology to create your perception. So the genes are potentials. They can create anything. And what you create with it is a complement to what you perceive. And you say, well, okay, Bruce, you stepped off the edge now. There's a lot of people out there. It's like, okay, your mind is turning on the genes, and it sounds like, what is all that? So if I could take just 2-3 minutes here, because if you understand the meaning of the science, how simple this experiment was that I did when my life changed. It was a simple experiment. Basically, what I did is I was cloning stem cells, and that was back in 1967, like over 40 years ago. And there's just a few of us in the world that understood anything about stem cells. Only recently have they become something. But so I was way back there with these guys with some stem cells. And what did I do is I'd isolate just one stem cell and put it into a tissue culture dish all by itself. The cell divides every about 10 hours. And then I go, okay, so after 10 days to 2 weeks, there must be like thousands of cells in the dish. But what's unique is that every cell is genetically identical to every other cell because they all came from the same parent. So now I have genetically identical cells, thousands of them. So here's the experiment, and it blew my mind. I take the population, split them up into 3 separate petri dishes, and I change the environment for the cells, meaning the culture medium. And the culture medium to a cell is like our environment with the air and the water and the biology of the ecosphere around us. So the cell's environment is they live in this culture fluid. So by changing the chemical composition of the culture fluid, I had 3 dishes. And so I had 3 different compositions of environment. And in one dish, the cells form muscle. In another dish, the stem cells form bone. And in a third dish, the stem cells form fat cells. And it's like, okay. And then you say a simple question, what controls the fate of the cells? And the answer turns out very simply, well, they were genetically identical, so the genes couldn't have done that because they all had the same genes. The only thing that was different was the environment. And so it's like, so it's the environment and the cell were interacting, and the environment information was used to engage the genetic expression of the cell. So in different environments, the cells engage in different expressions. And so we say, yeah, if I take a healthy dish, a plastic dish of my stem cells, and from a healthy environment and move it into a not so good environment, a less than optimal environment, the cells get sick. Now, if you were like a miniature cell in that dish and you were like the doctor cell, and the cells would say, what drugs should I take to make me better? And here's the wonderful answer. You take no drugs. You just take the dish and return it back to the original good condition it was, bring it back to the good environment. The cells become a reflection of the environment. The health of the cell is a reflection of the environment that it lives in. So now I say, okay, cool, I move the dish to a good environment and the cells get well. I move it to a bad environment, they get sick. So the environment and the cells are lockstep, and the culture medium composition determines the fate. And that's cool. That's plastic petri dishes and all that. Now here comes the jump. And the jump is this. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, Lance, if you look in the mirror, there's a single human being given the name Lance looking back at you. I see Bruce. All the listeners out there see themselves as a single human being. And then I go, well, it's an illusion because, in fact, while we see ourselves as a single entity, the truth is we're actually made out of 50 trillion cells. It's the cells that are the living elements. When I say the word me, I'm saying the word, I'm talking for a community of 50 trillion cells. So here's the jokey part that's like profound, and it goes like this. Okay, so then the human body is the equivalent of a skin-covered petri dish with 50 trillion cells in it. And the culture medium is called the blood. And the composition of the culture medium determines the genetic expression and the behavior. Okay? Now here comes the next step. I say, and what controls the blood's chemistry? And the answer is the brain is the chemist that releases the hormones and the signals and the regulators that control the environment. Right. And I go, yeah, but what causes the brain to release different chemicals? And the answer is perception. It's what you see that causes the release of the chemistry. So I'm sitting here, my eyes closed, and all of a sudden I open up my eyes and there's a saber-toothed tiger. My perception is, oh my God! And what's going to happen? I'm going to release, in this case, fight or flight response, which causes stress hormones to be sent through my body. Okay? And the stress hormones like histamine and epinephrine and cortisol, they change the genetics and behavior of the cell to get the organism into a protection mode, get it ready to run. Okay? And then I go, okay, what happens if I'm sitting there, my eyes closed, and I then open up my eyes, and before me is my beautiful partner, Margaret, and I see her. All of a sudden, I release different chemicals. I release the bonding chemicals of oxytocin. I release dopamine, the feel-good chemicals. I release growth hormones, the maintenance of the body chemicals. So basically it says, wait, I changed the culture medium by whatever I saw when I opened my eyes. And the answer is yes. And then the question is, but then we go to an interesting story. So, well, two people can look at the same environment and they see completely different things. And when they see different things, they release different chemistry. So two people in the same environment can have totally different biologies going on based on what they see. And then here comes the scary part. The scary part goes like this. If your mind makes a misinterpretation, do the cells know that there was an error? And the answer is no. What do the cells know? They just got the signal from the brain. I open up my eyes in that moment of like haziness, let's say, coming out of sleep. I look and all of a sudden I think I see a saber-toothed tiger in front of me. In that moment, just like, all of a sudden all this adrenaline's running through me, and then all of a sudden I just, like, it was just a fuzzy thing, and it was somebody I know. It was just like an image just got transposed, and there wasn't anything really wrong, but my cells didn't know that. My cells got the full jolt of all the adrenaline running through the system.
Yeah.
So the idea about it is this. If we hold beliefs or perceptions that are not true, we adjust our biology as if they were true. And the issues about that is if we hold beliefs that are stressful, then the biology that results from these perceptions, whether they're real or not, the perceptions will lead to chemistry that actually is what we now recognize the primary cause of disease in human biology. It's not from the genes. The primary cause of disease is the way our lifestyle is and the way we live in our world. This is the cause of the disease, and yet we keep looking for genetic causes and genetic cures when it's like, no, it was just lifestyle. That's basically what it was. Boy, did I ramble on that one.
No, this is really fascinating because I have heard before that the brain can't distinguish between a real event and one that's imaginary. So that would include television and theater and movies and so on, wouldn't it? And wars and
beliefs of war.
That's focusing on some horrible events,
yes,
which create a lot of fear. And then also, isn't not true that the bulk of the food that we eat has very little nutrition in it, having milked out the phytonutrients out of the soil many decades ago, and then we don't even know how much is genetically modified.
So we're in a crisis there, aren't we? And it is, but why is it important? Because it's forcing us to do something different. And what is that something different? In that case, it says start to eat local, start to eat organic. And then all of a sudden you start to realize, I don't have to be a victim of that. I have choices. And this is what's so good about the new genetics. The old genetics was the genes controlled who you are. You're a victim. But why? Because you didn't pick the genes. You can't change them. And they determine your life, so you're just like waiting like a gene time bomb that waits for a gene to cause something. And that's the old belief. The new belief says it's your perception that interfaces the cells via the blood's chemistry. And why is that relevant? Because I can change my perception. And it's like, well, then you can change your biology by the way you perceive your life. And if you change your perceptions, you change your biology. And the answer is it's exactly what epigenetics is all about.
Wow. Well, now, I just read today that scientists have created the first artificial DNA molecule.
Oh boy, that's really pushing that they created something synthetic. They did. It's a tour de force technically. Okay.
Yeah.
And what Venter did was he made a copy of a chromosome from a different species. So he synthesized. He took the original chromosome from the first species, and put it into a chemical soup that caused many, many copies of it to be made. So they were being made synthetically, actually, by a machine at some point. They found the sequence. They made a sequence. And so they copied the original DNA of something else, and then they put their copy into another cell. So did they synthetically make a new cell? And the answer is no. They took a copy. They were able to synthesize a copy of an existing cell and put it into another cell. So there's a big difference, because it would suggest like, oh, I know all the things of how to make a cell work. In fact, you didn't know that because you just copied this other one. You don't even know how the other one works. So basically, it's like, so you copied it, and I say technically really cool, okay? Except for the fact is they don't know how it works, so they just took out a cell's chromosome, put in the copied version, and then it just took off like the original version. But the idea is, so if you ask the question, well, do you know how this really works? And the answer is, well, not really. You just put this piece of DNA in there, and it's like. So I get upset about it because it's just a big, it's a lot of publicity stuff. But it also scares me because they don't know how it works. That's exactly it. I mean, the issue is
to continue messing around with it to see what they can add some together to create some kind of new life form, and that's combined with nanotechnology, with biology and DNA, that's could be a scary prospect.
It's more scary than helpful for this reason. They don't know how the existing system works.
Right.
And so the idea of trying to change pieces of the programming is like putting a virus, which it is, in fact, that's what they're doing. They're putting genes in via viruses, and I say, well, okay, good. How effective are the viruses in your computer? And all of a sudden, it's like, well, yeah, I could jam the damn machine. It's like, this is exactly the problem. They don't know how it works, but they're still trying to change the information. It's like, but you don't know how it creates this fabulous structure from these few building blocks. It's like, and yet you want to change the life of it. It's like, dangerous.
It's pretty frightening.
Yes.
And then some scientists, in fact, there's a fairly large group of them, are working to push toward an event horizon in which artificial intelligence is more powerful than we are and takes over, because they see that as the solution to our problems such as war and food production and so on and so forth. But we're talking about kind of a Matrix-type world, aren't we?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about. Boy, I'd stay away from that one right away, It's just basically this is so misunderstood reality that's going on here. And that kind of thinking is the kind of thinking that is even pushing us closer to the edge of that extinction, that's modifying the environment, because biologically we are, and biologically and in a sense spiritually, we are made in the image of an environment. That's a biological reality if you understand how the proteins of a body respond to the environment. So every protein responds to some environmental signal. So basically our physical structure is a complement to the environmental signals. Well, reason why this becomes critical is if we destroy the environment as we are doing, then our biology is no longer complementary to the environment. And
but we've got big pharmaceutical companies to fix us.
Well,
and we can always have a war to kill off the excess humans.
Well, this is, this unfortunate thinking, because they're using some very outdated and actually unproven beliefs that are really based on a Darwinian theory that says, hey, look, we're all going to go to hell because there's going to be so many people and not enough food that we're really going to have those fights out in the streets until the death and the final victory of the fittest. That's that grand German Darwinian nightmare. And the reality is that's not even valid science anymore. Right. And basically, it says, their belief system, populations keep growing and growing and growing. Yeah, tell me about the United States. It's like when we were in a better harmony situation, I think the population is going up higher now, because anytime organisms are in threat, the population is increased and they reproduce at younger ages. because this is nature's way of seeing that the biological imperative is revealing that we are threatened, and how do you keep the species alive? And the answer is reproduce more.
More of them.
Yeah, and then basically, then you go back and you say, well, what about in the United States? And the answer was at one point we were below 2 children for every family, which is just replacing the existing parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I said, well, how come we got so low? And the answer is because they didn't understand something about population control. Population increases when life is hard and difficult.